These stats are pretty scary. I mean, you're looking at less than half of graduates from the classes of 2009 to 2011 will find jobs when they get out?
Well, we'll find jobs within the first year of looking, which is a long time.
A long time.
And we're talking about full-time work here, so it's possible some of them will find temporary jobs. Some will probably end up interning. Some might do temp work. You know, there are sort of short-term options out there, but in terms of getting that first steady, permanent, full-time job, it can take a long time.
And that's a pretty big jump between, I mean, 73% of students were finding work within a year in that same time period. So from 73% to 49%, that's a big gap. Let's talk about some of the issues, though, that they're going to be presented with going forward in their careers. I mean, even if they don't find a job within the first year, what we're seeing in terms of the number of people still unemployed in this country is going to affect their ability even in the second year to get a job, I would think.
Yeah, that's true. And not only to find the job, but they'll be up against a lot of competition when they're looking for the job, not only from their own peers, but from the people who graduated in the 1, 2, 3, or 4 years before them, who have either were working originally, then were laid off, or also graduated into a terrible job market and haven't been able to find that full-time job that they're looking for. And then, you know, once they get the job, things are also tough because they're often going to be starting out at a lower salary.
Right, and then you start out at a lower salary, you're already behind there. But let's also just talk about, quickly take a pause and talk about student debt. I mean, first of all, students are going to college, are coming out with what are some of the numbers with the average debt right now?
The average from 2010, which is the last year we had available, was about $25,000, and that's for the 2/3 of students who come out with any debt at all.
So, and we see many students now, or many people, not students, who are in the job force, who can't, or want to be in the job force, they can't find work, they're going back to school, accumulating more debt. So this is a vicious cycle, and if you're waiting at least a year to get any kind of job, and who knows what kind of job you're going to get, this debt just accumulates, and you're going to be shouldered with this going forward.
Exactly, and that will have a long-term effect because it means there's less money that you can put towards savings or less money that you can put towards basic expenses, which is also part of the reason why so many kids are relying on their parents these days. And that, of course, delays their retirement if they're helping their kids pay their rent.
And here's where we begin to see this ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
Yeah.
Let's take a pause a minute and talk about salaries a little bit and how this will impact their salaries for the long term, because of course, if you don't work for a year when you get out, you've already delayed your starting wage. Then, you know, you get a job maybe in a year, you take anything you can get just because you want to get in the workforce, but you may not even be paid that much. How do we see this impacting them for decades to come?
Right, well, going back a little bit, what we found was that in the studies that we read, young men who are 23 to 29 finding their first full-time job are starting out at salaries about 8% lower than people who came out of college about 10 or 11 years ago. Wow. So, you know, like they are already starting out behind the game, basically, and those are inflation-adjusted numbers. Right now, kids who are finding their first jobs are basically being paid slightly more than graduates from 1989. So we really have not progressed very far. And then, of course, like you said earlier, you're starting out at a lower base pay. That means any raise you get is on top of a lower base, and so it accumulates. And when you move on to your next job and you tell them how much you were making, everything starts getting sort of delayed exactly, before you can, and you may never catch up. That's what the research shows.
When you talk to these students, I'm curious, you know, when you graduate from college, at least I was full of optimism when I got out of school. I did have a job when I got out of school, but on the other hand, even if you don't, I see a lot of kids very optimistic. What do they say to you? What are their plans? Are they thinking about this long-term picture? Or are they still pretty upbeat about their potential?
My colleague and I spoke to several students, and they seem very upbeat. I mean, the one that we quoted in the story, she came out of school with a job. She actually went through the on-campus recruitment process, and that many companies were recruiting either late last year or early this year when things actually looked like they were picking up. Right. So for them, you know, they were in a much better position because I think companies were feeling more optimistic. Right. Now the numbers are showing things are much shakier, and I think companies are probably more cautious than they were even a few months ago. But, you know, from the kids that we spoke to, there is a lot of optimism out there, and we think it might be the Lake Wobegon effect, where they've been told all their lives that they're all above average, and so, you know, they're upbeat.